On the day I turned 16, the state decided I had expired. Not died, just reached the end of my shelf life as a ward of the county, no longer eligible for the funding that kept a roof over my head and 3 meals cycling through my system. I stood in Mrs. Whitmore's office while she sorted through a stack of manila folders, each one a life reduced to bureaucratic shorthand, and I understood with perfect clarity that I was about to become a ghost. The kind that walks among the living but leaves no footprints, casts no shadow, matters to absolutely no one. The office smelled like industrial lemon cleaner and the stale coffee that had been sitting in the pot since dawn. Mrs. Whitmore wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and a cardigan that had seen better decades. She tapped one manicured fingernail against the edge of my file, the sound sharp and final, like a judge's gavel sealing a verdict. "Your grandfather left you something." Her voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone who had delivered bad news so many times it had become muscle memory, though I hesitate to call it an inheritance in the traditional sense. She slid a yellowed envelope across the desk. The paper felt brittle under my fingertips, as if it might crumble into dust if I gripped too hard. Inside was a deed to a piece of property in a place called Widow's Peak, and a single iron key so rusted it looked like it had been dredged up from the bottom of a lake. Widow's Peak. The name tasted like old pennies and regret. I had not thought about my grandfather Silas in 12 years. My memories of him were fragments of something that might have been a dream. The scent of pine sap and wood smoke, the rough texture of his hands when he lifted me onto his shoulders, the low rumble of his voice promising me that I would always have a place to come home to. Then one day the social workers came, and I was gone, swallowed into the machinery of the foster system, and Silas became a story I stopped telling myself because it hurt too much to remember. "It is a stone cellar on a frozen ridge," Mrs. Whitmore continued, leaning back in her chair. "The county taxes alone will eat you alive." She paused, sliding a second document toward me with the careful precision of someone laying down a winning hand. "But there is good news. A company called Aegis Power has made an offer. $3,000 for the property. Cash. Immediate." The check sat on the desk between us, crisp and clean, and printed with numbers that looked obscene to someone like me. $3,000. I could see the future. It represented a bus ticket to a city where no one knew my name, a cheap apartment with heat that actually worked, maybe even a community college course or two. A life where I did not have to wonder if there would be food tomorrow. Mrs. Whitmore pushed a pen across the desk. "All you have to do is sign. Then you take the money, and you start over somewhere warm, somewhere with opportunities." She leaned forward, her expression shifting into something that might have been genuine concern if I squinted hard enough. "Do not go up that mountain, Callan. There is nothing there but frostbite and failure." I looked at the check. Then I looked at the rusted key. Something stirred in the back of my mind, a memory so faint it was barely there. Silas holding a piece of wood up to the light, turning it slowly, studying the grain. He never kept junk. He did not believe in worthless things. If he had held on to this land through whatever hell had driven us apart, there had to be a reason. No. The word came out quieter than I intended, but it landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "Excuse me, I am not signing." I stood up, tucking the deed and the key into the canvas backpack that held everything I owned in the world. The strap was frayed and the zipper stuck, but it was mine. Just like the cellar was mine now, worthless or not, Mrs. Whitmore's expression hardened. You are making a mistake. Maybe. But it is my mistake to make. I walked out of that office with my heart hammering against my ribs, and the overwhelming sensation that I had just stepped off a cliff in the dark. For 12 years, other people had made every decision that mattered. Where I lived, what I ate when I woke up, and when I went to sleep. For the first time in my life, I was holding the wheel. I had no idea where I was going, but at least I was the one choosing the direction. The bus ride north took 6 hours. I watched the landscape transform through the grimy window, the flat agricultural plains giving way to foothills and then to mountains that clawed at the sky like broken teeth. The other passengers thinned out at every stop until I was alone rattling through the high country in a vehicle that smelled like diesel and old upholstery and the collective despair of everyone who had ever ridden it to the end of the line. The driver dropped me at a crossroads that did not even have a name on the map, just an intersection of 2 gravel roads that disappeared into the white wilderness. Snow was already falling, fat flakes that stuck to my eyelashes and melted against my skin. The cold hit me like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. Standing beside a black SUV that looked wildly out of place in the desolation was a man in a tailored overcoat. He was maybe 50 with silver hair and the kind of face that had been sculpted by good genetics and expensive skin care. He looked at me the way a wolf looks at a wounded deer. Mr. Vance. His voice was smooth, the kind of voice that sold things for a living. I am Director Thorne. I work for Aegis Power. I gripped the straps of my backpack, feeling the weight of the key pressing against my spine through the canvas. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Thorne stepped closer, his breath misting in the frozen air. That property your grandfather left you, it is not safe. The infrastructure is unstable. The winter conditions are lethal, and frankly, a boy your age has no business trying to survive up there alone. We are prepared to double our offer, $6,000, right now, before the storm closes in and you end up a statistic. He pulled out a checkbook, the leather embossed with gold lettering. Behind him the mountains loomed like a wall of jagged stone and ice. I thought about the $3,000 Mrs. Whitmore had offered, then $6,000. Numbers that had seemed enormous were suddenly being tossed around like they meant nothing. If a corporation was willing to drive into a blizzard and double their offer on the spot, then whatever Silas had left me was worth a hell of a lot more than they were letting on. I am going home. Thorne's expression shifted, the veneer of friendliness cracking just enough to let me see the steel underneath. There is no home up there, Kalen. Just a pile of rocks and a winter that will kill you before you make it through the week. Then I guess you will read about it in the papers. I walked past him, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. Behind me, I heard the SUV door slam and the engine roar to life, but Thorne did not follow. He just let me walk into the white wilderness alone, and I wondered if he was hoping the mountain would solve his problem for him. The trail was barely visible under the accumulation, just a faint depression in the landscape that might have been a path or might have been my imagination. I had a hand-drawn map that Silas had included with the deed, but the paper was already soggy from the moisture in the air, and the ink was starting to blur. Every step was a battle. The snow came up past my knees in places, and the wind screamed through the trees with a sound like nails on sheet metal. I had grown up in group homes and foster placements, bouncing from one temporary situation to another, but I had never felt cold like this. It was not just the absence of warmth, it was the presence of something actively trying to kill me, seeping through my jacket and my jeans and my skin until it wrapped around my bones. My lungs burned with every breath. My fingers went numb even inside my gloves. I kept walking because stopping meant dying, and I had not come this far just to freeze into a monument to poor decision-making. The stone cellar appeared through the white curtain of snow like a hallucination. It was built into the side of the mountain, half buried by drifts, the walls made of dark granite that looked like it had been hewn directly from the bedrock. The door was a massive slab of weathered oak, swollen from decades of moisture and partially buried under the latest accumulation. I threw my weight against it and felt something give. The hinges shrieked in protest, metal grinding against metal, and then I was inside and the wind cut off like someone had thrown a switch. Silence. The relief was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I stood there gasping my breath, visible in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the stone, and tried to process what I was seeing. The cellar was larger than I had expected, maybe 20 feet square, with a ceiling high enough that I could stand upright. The walls were lined with rotting timber, and there was a pile of old newspapers in one corner, yellowed and brittle with age. In the center of the far wall was a stone fireplace, the opening dark and cold and filled with ash that might have been there since before I was born. I fumbled for the box of matches I had bought with the last of my money, my fingers so stiff they felt like wooden pegs. The first match broke. The second one lit, but went out before I could get it near the crumpled newspaper I had gathered. The third one burned my thumb, and I dropped it with a curse that echoed off the stone. I sank down onto the dirt floor and felt the cold seeping up through my jeans, through my skin, into the marrow of my bones. This was it, the end of the line. I had refused $6,000 and a warm bed to die in a hole in the ground, and somewhere Mrs. Whitmore was probably shaking her head and filing my death certificate before it even happened. My hand, searching blindly for anything dry enough to burn, brushed against something that was not stone and was not wood. It was metal, smooth and cold, and running along the base of the wall like a vein. I followed it with my fingertips, too numb to really feel what I was touching, until my hand landed on a circular handle. Brass, I thought, or maybe bronze. Too dark to tell. I leaned closer, squinting in the failing light, and saw letters etched into the metal. Not a manufacturer's mark or a serial number. A name. Kalen. My name. Carved into a brass valve in a cellar I had never seen before, in a place I had not even known existed until this morning. My heart kicked against my ribs. This was not random. This was not some forgotten piece of junk left behind by accident. Silas had put this here. He had put my name on it. He had been waiting for me. I gripped the handle with both hands and twisted. At first nothing happened, and I thought maybe it was frozen or rusted shut, but then I felt it give. The valve turned with a grinding screech, and a sound filled the cellar that made every hair on my body stand up. Hissing. Not the hiss of steam or air escaping, something deeper, rhythmic, like the mountain itself was breathing. I struck my last match and held it to the opening of the fireplace, not really expecting anything, just going through the motions because I had nothing else left to try. The flame erupted with a sound like thunder, not orange, not the flickering yellow of burning wood, Blue. A brilliant sapphire blue that filled the cellar with light so bright I had to shield my eyes. The heat that rolled out was immediate and total, washing over me like a wave, and I staggered back from the intensity of it. The fire roared steady and pure, and the shadows retreated to the corners of the room. I could see everything now. The timber beams overhead, the stone walls sweating moisture as they warmed the pile of rotting logs I'd been trying to burn. And in the corner, partially hidden behind the woodpile, I saw something I had missed before. A metal box. Old. Rusted. Tucked away like a secret. I pulled it out and pried open the lid. Inside were papers, maps, geological surveys drawn in Silas's cramped handwriting, each one dated and annotated with notes in the margins. I spread them out on the floor near the fire, my hands still shaking from the cold, and tried to make sense of what I was looking at. This was not just a map of Widow's Peak. It was a blueprint, a detailed analysis of the rock formations, the mineral deposits, the underground structures that ran beneath this mountain like veins in a body. And in the center of it all, marked with a red circle and a note in Silas's hand, was this exact spot. The cellar. The valve. The source of the sapphire flame. Natural gas. That was what this was. Silas had found a pocket of natural gas, maybe a whole reservoir of it, running under this property. And according to his notes, it was not just valuable. It was critical. The annotations talked about pipeline routes, about geological choke points, about how any major infrastructure project coming through this region would have to pass through this exact coordinate. I looked at the $6,000 Thorne had offered. Then I looked at the maps showing $1 billion pipeline that could not be built without access to this land. They had tried to rob me. They had dressed it up as charity, as concern for a homeless kid who did not know any better. But what they had really been doing was attempting to steal something priceless for the cost of a used car. I sat there in the glow of the sapphire fire, feeling warmth for the first time in hours, and realized that Silas had not abandoned me. He had been playing a long game. He had kept this land out of their hands for 12 years, waiting for the day when I would be old enough to claim it, waiting for the day when the law would have to recognize me as the rightful owner. He had not left me a pile of worthless rocks. He had left me a fortress. And judging by the desperation in Thorne's voice, by the way Aegis Power had been scrambling to get me to sign before I figured out what I actually had, they knew it too. I pulled Silas's map closer to the fire and studied it until my eyes burned. There were pressure readings, flow calculations, notes about seasonal variations and geological stability. In the corner of one page, written in faded pencil, was a single line that made my throat tighten. The earth gives, but it also takes. Balance the heart or the mountain screams. I looked at the brass pressure gauge mounted next to the valve. The needle was trembling and the red zone vibrating with a low hum I could feel in my teeth. This was not just a fireplace. It was a pressure release. Silas had built a system to tap into the gas veins safely, to bleed off the excess before it built up to dangerous levels, which meant I was not just sitting on a fortune, I was sitting on a bomb. I thought about Thorne and his smooth voice and his $6,000 bribe. I thought about Mrs. Whitmore and her practiced sympathy, and her assumption that I was too stupid to know the difference between charity and theft. I thought about 12 years of being shuffled from one temporary placement to another, always being told I was a burden, always being reminded that I should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. And I realized that for the first time in my life I had something they could not just take. I had the truth. I had the deed. I had my name carved into a brass valve that controlled the pulse of the mountain. I was not going to run. I was not going to sell. I was not going to let them make me disappear. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing, battering the stone walls with wind and ice. But inside, the sapphire flame burned steady and bright, and I sat there in the warmth and the light, and felt something I had not felt since I was 4 years old. I felt like I had come home. The fire transformed the cellar from a tomb into something almost habitable. I could see the full extent of the space now, the rough timber shelves along one wall, the pile of tools in the corner covered in dust and cobwebs, the way the stone had been cut and fitted with a precision that spoke of someone who knew what they were doing. Silas had built this place to last. He had built it to wait. I found a cache of supplies behind the woodpile, canned goods, their labels faded but still readable, jars of preserved vegetables, a canteen of water that had somehow not frozen solid, matches in a waterproof tin, a heavy wool blanket that smelled like mothballs and memories. He had known I would come, or at least he had hoped. He had left me everything I needed to survive tucked away in a cellar that everyone else thought was worthless. I ate cold beans straight from the can and tried not to think about the fact that I was completely alone on a mountain in the middle of a blizzard, with no way to call for help and no guarantee that anyone would come looking if I disappeared. The firelight flickered against the stone walls, casting shadows that moved like living things. And I wondered how many nights Silas had sat in this exact spot watching the same fire, planning for a future he would not live to see. The maps were spread out around me like pieces of a puzzle I was just beginning to understand. Silas had documented everything: the geological surveys, the property boundaries, the corporate filings for Aegis Power, even copies of legal documents that showed how they had tried to force him off this land, letters from lawyers, foreclosure notices, threats wrapped in the language of civic duty and public safety. They had gone after him with everything they had. Money, legal pressure, probably intimidation tactics that never made it into the official record, and somehow he had held out. Somehow he had kept them at bay long enough for me to turn 16 and claim the inheritance. I looked at the pressure gauge again, watching the needle tremble in the red zone. Silas's note had been clear: balance the heart or the mountain screams. But what did that mean? How was I supposed to balance something I barely understood? I stood up and examined the valve more closely. There were actually 3 of them, I realized. The main valve with my name on it, and 2 smaller ones mounted on either side. One had a label that read main flow, the other pressure release. Next to the gauges was a handwritten chart, faded but still legible, showing optimal pressure ranges and instructions for adjusting the flow. Silas had not just left me a fortune. He had left me a responsibility. This was not just about keeping warm or making money. This was about managing something dangerous, something that could kill me if I made a mistake. I thought about Thorne's face when I had refused his offer, the way his expression had shifted from practiced concern to something colder, harder. He had not been worried about my safety. He had been worried about his pipeline, his project, his billion-dollar investment that hinged on access to this exact piece of ground. and I had just become the one obstacle he could not buy his way around. The wind outside intensified, battering the door with enough force that I could hear the oak groaning under the assault. Snow was probably piling up against the entrance, sealing me in. By morning I might not be able to get out even if I wanted to. But the strange thing was, I did not want to. Despite the isolation, despite the very real danger of being trapped on a mountain with a potentially lethal gas pocket underneath me, I felt safer here than I had in any of the foster homes or group placements I had cycled through. This place was mine. The deed had my name on it. The valve had my name on it. For the first time in 12 years, I existed somewhere as more than just a file number or a temporary problem. I wrapped myself in Silas's old blanket and lay down near the fire, watching the sapphire flames dance against the stone. The heat was almost hypnotic, and despite everything, I felt my eyes growing heavy. My body was crashing from the adrenaline and the cold and the sheer exhaustion of the day. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the last clear memory I had of Silas. I had been maybe 4 years old, sitting on the floor of some place I could not quite picture, watching him work on a piece of wood. He had been carving something, his hands moving with the kind of precision that comes from decades of practice, and I had asked him why he spent so much time on something that might not even turn out right. He had looked at me with eyes the same color as mine, and said something I had not understood at the time, but that came back to me now with perfect clarity. Because the things worth keeping are the things you refuse to throw away, even when everyone tells you they are worthless. I fell asleep with the sapphire fire burning and the mountain breathing beneath me, and for the first time since I could remember, I did not dream about being forgotten. I woke to silence so complete it felt like the world had ended while I slept. The sapphire flame still burned, casting its steady glow across the stone walls, but something was different. Wrong. It took me a moment to realize what it was the wind had stopped. The howling that had battered the cellar all night was gone, replaced by a stillness that pressed against my eardrums like water. I pushed myself up, my muscles stiff from sleeping on the dirt floor, and made my way to the door. It took all my strength to crack it open against the weight of fresh snow, and when I finally got it wide enough to see out, my breath caught. The storm had buried the world. Snow was piled against the entrance nearly to my chest, smooth and pristine in the early morning light. The sky was the color of polished steel, and the air was so cold it burned my lungs when I inhaled. Below me the valley stretched out in shades of white and gray, and I could just make out a thin ribbon of smoke rising from the town in the distance. Then I saw the machines. 3 of them, heavy equipment painted in Aegis Power's corporate colors, crawling up the access road like enormous insects. Behind them came trucks and a command trailer, and even from this distance I could see the yellow caution tape being strung up across the trailhead. They were not coming to negotiate. They were setting up a perimeter. I watched them work for maybe 20 minutes, men in orange vests moving with the efficient choreography of people following a predetermined plan. They positioned the equipment to block both vehicle and foot traffic, set up portable generators, and erected what looked like a checkpoint station at the base of the trail. When they were done, Widow's Peak was officially under quarantine. The message was clear: I could stay up here and freeze, or I could come down and surrender. Those were my only options. I pulled the door shut and leaned against it, my heart hammering. This was different from Thorne's personal visit, different from the corporate charm offensive. This was a siege. They were going to wait me out, let hunger and isolation do what money could not, and when I finally stumbled down that mountain half dead from exposure, they would be there with their lawyers and their paperwork and their offer that I would be too broken to refuse. Except Silas had known. He had known exactly how they operated because they had done the same thing to him. I went back to the cache of supplies and started taking inventory. Canned goods, at least 30 of them. Dried meat wrapped in butcher paper. Jars of preserves. A 20-pound bag of rice in a sealed container. Water in heavy glass bottles. Firewood stacked against the far wall, enough to last weeks if I was careful. He had prepared for this. He had anticipated the siege and left me everything I needed to outlast it. But there was more. As I moved the crates aside to get a better count, I found something I had missed in the darkness. A trap door built into the floor. The wood fitted so perfectly into the stone that it was almost invisible. I pried it open and found myself looking down into a narrow crawl space, maybe 4 feet deep. Inside were more crates, medical supplies, batteries, a hand-crank radio, books, a lockbox that rattled when I shook it, and in the very back, wrapped in oilcloth, a hunting rifle with 2 boxes of ammunition. I stared at the rifle for a long time, feeling the weight of what it represented. Silas had not just been preparing me to survive the winter. He had been preparing me to fight. The first day passed in careful work. I organized the supplies, checked the pressure gauges, adjusted the valves according to Silas's charts. The system he had built was elegant in its simplicity. The main valve controlled the flow of gas to the fireplace. The secondary valve bled off excess pressure to prevent buildup, and the tertiary valve was an emergency shutoff in case something went catastrophically wrong. As long as I kept the pressure in the safe zone and monitored the flow, I could maintain the fire indefinitely. The sapphire flame was not just heat, it was power. It was leverage. It was the one thing Aegis needed and could not take by force. On the second morning, I heard the sound of an engine laboring up the trail. I watched through a crack in the door as a snowmobile appeared, pulling a supply sled. The driver was bundled in cold weather gear, but I recognized Thorne's silver hair when he pulled back his hood. He stopped maybe 50 yards from the cellar, close enough to be heard, but far enough to stay out of reach. His voice carried across the frozen landscape with the artificial amplification of a bullhorn. Kalen Vance, this is your final opportunity to resolve this situation peacefully. The county has declared this property a public safety hazard due to unregulated natural gas extraction. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises voluntarily. After that, we will be forced to take action to secure the site. I did not answer. I just watched him stand there in the cold, waiting for a response that was not coming. You are drowning in water that is way over your head, boy. Thorne's voice took on an edge of frustration. You have no legal representation, no resources, no allies. You are 16 years old and alone on a mountain. This is not a fight you can win. Still, I said nothing. Let him talk. Let him waste his breath and his time and his corporate resources on a kid who was refusing to play by their rules. After another minute of silence, Thorne climbed back onto the snowmobile and drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. I watched him disappear down the trail and felt something cold settle in my chest. They were not going to give up. This was just the opening move. The third afternoon brought a new development. I was checking the pressure gauges when I heard something that was not wind and was not machinery. A voice, faint, desperate, calling for help. I grabbed Silas's rifle without thinking and pushed through the snow toward the sound. The voice was coming from somewhere north of the cellar beyond the tree line where the ridge dropped away into a steep ravine. I found him pinned under a fallen cedar tree, his legs trapped beneath the massive trunk, and his face the color of old snow. He looked maybe 60, with a weathered face and eyes that were struggling to focus. His lips were blue and his breathing was shallow, rapid. Hypothermia, advanced stages. If I left him here, he would be dead within the hour. I set the rifle down and got my hands under the tree trunk. It was impossibly heavy, waterlogged and frozen, but I planted my feet and lifted with everything I had. The man dragged himself free inch by agonizing inch, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. "Can you walk?" He tried to stand and collapsed immediately. His left leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. I got one arm under his shoulders and started dragging him back toward the cellar. He was not a small man, and the snow made every step a battle. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned. By the time I got him through the door and into the warmth of the sapphire flame, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. He lay there on the floor, his whole body convulsing with shivers, and I did the only thing I could think of. I piled every blanket I had onto him and fed the fire until the cellar was almost too hot to breathe in. It took an hour before he stopped shaking. Another hour before his color started to come back. When he finally opened his eyes and looked around, really looked around, his expression went from confusion to something like awe. "Arthur." His voice was barely a whisper, rough and broken. "He did it. He actually did it." I knelt beside him. "You knew my grandfather." The man's eyes filled with tears that cut tracks through the grime on his face. "Knew him, boy. I am the only reason he survived long enough to leave you anything. My name is Jasper. I live on the eastern ridge about 3 miles from here. Your grandfather and I hunted these mountains together for 40 years. He tried to sit up and winced, his hand going to his leg. That is broken. Probably in 3 places. I am not walking out of here any time soon." I helped him prop himself against the wall and gave him water from one of Silas's bottles. He drank it like a man who had been wandering in the desert, then looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You look just like him. Same eyes, same stubborn set to your jaw. He used to say you had the kind of face that would either make you a hero or get you killed, depending on which way the wind blew." The words hit harder than they should have. I had spent 12 years thinking Silas had abandoned me, that I had been too much trouble or not enough of whatever he needed. Hearing that he had talked about me, that he had thought about me, opened something in my chest that I had kept locked for so long I had forgotten it was there. Jasper shifted his weight and grimaced. "They are going to come for you. You know that, right? Aegis does not lose. They have lawyers and politicians and enough money to drown this whole county in legal fees. They will make you disappear one way or another. Let them try." Jasper studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You really are Arthur's grandson. He said the same thing when they came after him the first time. Said he would burn this mountain to ash before he let them take it. What happened? How did they separate us?" Jasper's expression darkened. "They weaponized the system. Found out Arthur was raising a 4-year-old boy in a stone cellar with no running water and no central heat. Did not matter that you were healthy, did not matter that Arthur loved you more than his own life. They got a judge to declare him an unfit guardian, threatened him with jail time if he fought it, said they would make sure you disappeared into the foster system where he would never find you again. My hands clenched into fists. So he gave me up. He surrendered his parental rights voluntarily. Jasper's voice was heavy with old anger. It was the only way to keep the vultures from circling too close. If he had fought them in court, they would have buried him. Instead, he played dead. Let them think he was just a crazy old man who did not care anymore. And while they were congratulating themselves on their victory, he was up here building this place, documenting everything, making sure that when you turned 16 you would have the ammunition to fight back. The pieces started falling into place, the geological surveys, the corporate filings, the letters and legal documents. Silas had not been collecting evidence randomly. He had been building a case, assembling a weapon that I could use when the time came. Where is he now? Jasper looked away. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack. I found him sitting right where you are now, looking at those maps. His last words were about you. He said to make sure you got the letter when you were old enough. What letter? Jasper pointed to the lockbox I had found in the crawl space. That one. He made me promise I would not open it, that I would wait until you came home. I have been checking this cellar every week for 3 years, waiting for the day you would show up. I retrieved the lockbox and found it was not actually locked, just latched. Inside was a single envelope yellowed with age, my name written across the front in Silas's shaky handwriting. My hands were trembling so badly I almost tore the paper trying to open it. The letter was written on the back of a grocery receipt, the ink faded but still legible. My dearest Kaylin, if you are reading this, the storm has brought you home. Forgive me for the silence. I had to make the world believe I did not care so they would not look too closely at what I was saving for you. They took you from me with lawyers and threats and the full weight of a system designed to protect children by destroying families. I let them because the alternative was losing you forever. I chose the long game. I chose to be the villain in your story so that someday you could be the hero of your own. You are the fire in this mountain, boy. You are the reason I held out when any sane man would have sold and moved on. Do not let them put you out. Do not let them tell you that you are too young or too poor or too alone to fight. You come from a line of men who would rather die than surrender, and I raised you to be the best of us. The valve has your name on it because this mountain is yours. The flame burns because you deserve warmth. The deed is ironclad because I spent every penny I had making sure they could not take it from you. Trust Jasper. Trust the maps. Trust yourself. And remember that abandonment is sometimes just love playing a game so cruel and so long that no one understands it until the final move is made. I am sorry I could not be there to see you claim what is rightfully yours. I am sorry for the years we lost. But I am not sorry for the choice I made because that choice gave you a chance. Take it. Make them regret ever underestimating a Vance. With all the love a foolish old man can carry, Silas. I read it 3 times, the words blurring as my vision went liquid. Jasper sat there in respectful silence, giving me space to process what I was holding. He knew they would come after me the same way they came after him. Jasper nodded. That is why he documented everything. Every bribe they offered, every threat they made, every corner they cut on environmental assessments and safety protocols. He was building ammunition for a war he would not live to fight. I looked at the maps spread across the floor, at the pressure gauges monitoring the mountain's pulse, at the sapphire flame that represented both fortune and responsibility. Silas had not just given me an inheritance. He had given me a fortress and the tools to defend it. They think I am just a scared kid who will fold under pressure. Jasper's expression was grim. They are about to learn that scared and stupid are not the same thing. Over the next 3 weeks, I learned how to manage the mountain. Jasper's broken leg meant he could not move much at first, but his mind was sharp and his knowledge invaluable. He talked me through the subtle indicators that meant pressure was building too fast, the way to adjust the flow to maximize heat efficiency, the emergency procedures if something went wrong. For the first week, Jasper mostly slept and gave instructions from his makeshift bed near the fire. The second week, he could sit up for longer periods, teaching me to read the mountain the way Silas had taught him. By the third week, the swelling in his leg had gone down enough that he could move around with a crutch I fashioned from a fallen branch. He also told me stories about Silas, filling in gaps in my memory with details that made my grandfather feel real again. Silas had been a logger before the big companies bought up all the timber rights. He had watched his livelihood get swallowed by corporate consolidation, seen his friends and neighbors driven off their land by legal maneuvering and financial pressure. When he discovered the gas pocket under Widow's Peak, he understood immediately what it meant. Not just money, but power. The power to say no to people who were used to hearing yes. He spent the last 20 years of his life preparing for this moment. Jasper's voice was rough with emotion. He knew he would not live to see you fight, but he made damn sure you would have everything you needed when the time came. Outside, the siege continued. Aegis brought in more equipment, more personnel. They set up a mobile command center at the base of the trail and started running supply convoys up and down the mountain, making a show of their resources and their reach. Twice a day, Thorne or one of his deputies would make the climb to within shouting distance of the cellar and deliver some variation of the same message: vacate voluntarily or be removed by force. I never answered. Silence was its own form of defiance. On the morning that marked 4 weeks since my arrival, Jasper woke me before dawn. Listen. I held my breath and heard what he was talking about, the sound of heavy machinery closer than before. They were widening the trail, bringing in equipment capable of reaching the cellar. They are done waiting. Jasper's face was pale. You need to get out of here, Kalen. They will tear this place apart with you in it if they have to. I thought about Silas's letter, about the 12 years he had spent being called a madman and a failure, all to keep this place safe for me, about the fact that I had spent my entire childhood believing I was unwanted, when the truth was that I had been protected in the only way that mattered. I am not running. Jasper grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong despite the weeks of recovery. This is not about courage, boy. This is about survival. You cannot hold off a corporation with a hunting rifle and stubbornness. Maybe not. But I can make it expensive enough that they think twice about the next kid who stands in their way. I went to the crawl space and retrieved the hand crank radio. It took me 3 tries to get it working. The battery's long dead, but the mechanical components still functional. When the static finally resolved into something like clarity, I tuned to the emergency frequency and started recording. My name is Kalen Vance. I am 16 years old, and I am the legal owner of property on Widow's Peak. Aegis Power Corporation is currently attempting to forcibly remove me from land that is mine by deed and by right. They have blockaded the access road, they have threatened me with legal action, and they are now preparing to demolish my home with me inside it. I am recording this so that there is a record of what happened here. If you are hearing this, it means I am either dead or disappeared, and the people responsible are the ones who told you they were acting in the public interest. I released the transmission button and heard my own voice echo back through the static, thin and distorted, but unmistakably there. Jasper stared at me like I had lost my mind. That does not do anything. Nobody monitors those frequencies anymore. Maybe. Or maybe someone hears it and starts asking questions. Maybe a reporter looking for a story, or a lawyer who hates corporate bullying, or just someone with a conscience who thinks a kid being crushed by a billion-dollar company is worth making noise about. Jasper was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. Arthur said you were a fighter. I did not believe him until right now. The sound of machinery grew louder. Through the cracks in the door I could see the lights of heavy equipment making their way up the trail, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like the eyes of enormous predators. They were not coming to negotiate anymore. They were coming to end this. I checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded, and positioned myself where I had a clear view of the approach. Jasper watched me with an expression I could not quite read. You planning to shoot someone? I am planning to make sure they know I am serious. There is a difference between standing your ground and committing suicide, Kalen. I know. I am counting on them knowing it too. The first piece of equipment crested the ridge just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. An excavator, its massive bucket swinging through the air like the fist of an angry god. Behind it came trucks and crews, and Thorne himself standing on the running board of a black SUV like a general surveying a battlefield. The excavator's engine roared, belching diesel smoke into the frozen air. It positioned itself maybe 30 yards from the cellar, the bucket raised high enough to smash down through the roof with a single blow. Thorne's voice came through a megaphone, distorted but clear. This is your final warning. Exit the structure immediately. We are authorized to use whatever means necessary to secure this site. I stepped out into the morning light with the rifle slung across my back, not pointing it at anyone but making sure they could see it. The temperature was maybe 10 degrees below zero, and my breath came out in clouds that hung in the still air. This is my property. You have no right to be here. Thorne's expression hardened. We have every right. This site has been declared a hazard by the County Emergency Council. You are endangering yourself and others by remaining here. Then show me the paperwork. Show me the court order. Show me the legal authority that says you can destroy someone's home without due process. For the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across Thorne's face. He had been expecting a scared kid, someone who would fold under the pressure of heavy machinery and corporate authority. He had not been expecting someone who knew enough to demand documentation. The paperwork is being processed. In the meantime, we are acting under emergency protocols. Emergency protocols require immediate threat to life or property. I am not a threat to anyone, and this property is safer than it has been in decades thanks to the safety systems my grandfather installed. So unless you can show me proof that I am violating some actual law, you and your equipment can get the hell off my land." The crews had stopped working, I realized. They were watching this exchange with the kind of attention that meant they were not entirely comfortable with what they had been ordered to do. These were working men, probably locals, who knew what it felt like to be pushed around by people with money and lawyers. Thorne seemed to sense he was losing control of the narrative. He gestured to the excavator operator. "Proceed with demolition." The operator hesitated, looking from Thorne to me and back again. I stepped forward, letting the rifle shift just enough that it became impossible to ignore. "You tear down this cellar, you are destroying evidence of corporate malfeasance that goes back 2 decades. Every bribe Aegis offered my grandfather, every threat, every illegal shortcut on environmental assessments. It is all documented, and it is all stored safely off-site. You make me disappear, and it all goes public. Every newspaper in the state gets a copy, every environmental watchdog, every regulatory agency. You will be fighting lawsuits for the next 10 years. It was a bluff. The evidence was real, but I had not sent it anywhere. It was still here in the cellar in Silas's lockbox, waiting to be weaponized. But Thorne did not know that, and judging by the way his jaw clenched, he was not willing to risk it. "You are playing with forces you do not understand, boy." His voice had lost its smooth corporate polish, revealing something sharper underneath. "You do not have the resources to fight us. You do not have lawyers or money or connections. All you have is a pile of rocks and delusions of adequacy. What I have is the one thing you need and cannot take by force." I pointed at the ground beneath my feet. "This property is the choke point for your entire northern pipeline. Without access to this exact coordinate, your billion-dollar project goes nowhere. Silas figured that out 20 years ago, and he spent every day since then making sure you could not steal it from a kid who did not know better." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Thorne stared at me across 30 yards of frozen ground, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing costs and benefits, risks and rewards, trying to figure out if crushing me now was worth the potential fallout. Finally, he lowered the megaphone. "Stand down." The excavator operator killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "This is not over." Thorne's voice was quiet now, dangerous. "We will be back with proper authorization. We will bring the full weight of every legal and regulatory mechanism we have access to. And when we are done, you will wish you had taken the $6,000. He climbed into the SUV, and the convoy began its slow retreat down the mountain. I stood there until they were completely out of sight, then went back into the cellar and collapsed against the wall, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. Jasper was staring at me with something approaching reverence. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. I did not feel brave. I felt terrified. My hands were trembling and my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest, but I had held my ground. I had made them blink first, and for the first time in my life I understood what Silas had been trying to teach me all along. Power is not about who has the most resources. It is about who is willing to hold on longer, who is willing to refuse the easy exit and fight for something that matters. I looked at the sapphire flame still burning steady and bright, and realized that I was no longer just defending a piece of property. I was defending a legacy. I was defending the memory of a man who had sacrificed everything so that I could stand here and say no to people who were used to getting their way. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, covering the tracks left by Aegis's equipment. The mountain was reclaiming its silence, erasing the evidence of the confrontation. But the war was far from over. Thorn had retreated, but he would be back. They always came back. The difference was that now I knew I could make them bleed. The retreat bought me 3 days of silence. 3 days where the only sounds were the crackle of the sapphire flame and Jasper's labored breathing as his body fought to heal. 3 days where I could almost pretend that Thorn had given up, that the standoff had been enough to make them reconsider. Then the supply helicopters started flying over. They came low enough that I could see the Aegis logo on the fuselage, close enough that the rotor wash kicked up swirls of snow around the cellar. They were not delivering anything. They were making a point, reminding me that they had resources I could not match, that they could reach me even if the ground approach was blocked. Jasper watched one pass overhead and shook his head. Psychological warfare. They want you thinking about how small you are, how isolated. Next, they will start cutting supply lines, making sure the town knows that helping you means becoming their enemy too. Can they do that? They have been doing it for 20 years. Jasper shifted his weight, grimacing as his broken leg protested. Why do you think half the businesses in the valley are owned by Aegis subsidiaries now? They buy up anyone who might pose a problem and shut down anyone who refuses to sell. Your grandfather watched it happen, watched good men lose everything because they stood in the way of progress. I looked at the evidence spread across the floor. Silas's meticulous documentation of every crime, every violation, every moment where Aegis had chosen profit over people. It was damning. But paper only mattered if someone was willing to look at it. The satellite phone was in the lockbox with the letter. Old technology, but functional. Jasper had shown me how to activate it, how to find a signal through the interference of the mountains. I turned it on and watched the screen flicker to life, searching for connection with a world that felt impossibly far away. Who are you calling, everyone? I started with the local newspaper, a weekly publication that mostly covered county fairs and high school sports. The editor sounded suspicious when I explained who I was, but her tone shifted when I mentioned Aegis power and illegal land acquisition. She agreed to meet me halfway down the mountain neutral ground where neither of us would be completely vulnerable. Then I called the State Environmental Agency, and the Federal Pipeline Safety Board, and 3 different law firms that specialized in corporate malfeasance. Most of them brushed me off or told me to submit my complaint through official channels, but one lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Strand, actually listened. How old are you? 16. And you are alone up there? Not completely, but close enough. There was a pause. I could hear the click of a keyboard in the background. Mr. Vance, what you are describing amounts to a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 2 decades. If even half of what you are saying is true, this is a case that could redefine corporate accountability in energy sector land acquisition. So you will take it? Another pause. I need to see the documentation first. But if it holds up, yes, I will take it. Pro bono. Why? Because corporations like Aegis rely on the fact that people cannot afford to fight them. They bet on exhaustion and poverty and the sheer overwhelming weight of the legal system. Every now and then someone needs to remind them that the law still means something. I gave her coordinates for the meeting point and ended the call. My hands were shaking. This was real now. I was not just defending a cellar anymore. I was going to war. Jasper was watching me with an expression I could not quite parse. Your grandfather would be proud, terrified, but proud. Did he ever try to fight them publicly once, early on? He went to the county board with evidence of bribery of Aegis paying officials to fast-track permits without proper environmental review. They buried him, made him look like a paranoid old man with a grudge. After that, he realized he needed to be smarter. He needed to wait until he had something they could not ignore and someone young enough to see it through. So he waited 12 years. He waited until you were old enough to claim the inheritance without them being able to appoint a guardian who would sell it out from under you. Jasper's voice was rough. The law says 16 is when you can fight your own battles. He was counting on that. The meeting with the newspaper editor happened 2 days later. I made the hike down with the lockbox strapped to my back and Jasper's rifle across my shoulders, not because I expected trouble, but because I was done pretending to be helpless. The editor, a woman in her 50s named Catherine Morris, was waiting at the trailhead with a photographer and a digital recorder. She looked me up and down when I emerged from the tree line, taking in my worn clothing and the way the cold had chapped my face raw. Then she saw the rifle, and her expression tightened. You planning to use that? Only if someone gives me a reason. I set the lockbox down between us. You wanted to see proof. Here it is. Catherine opened the box and started going through the documents while her photographer captured everything. I watched her face change as she read, the professional skepticism giving way to something sharper. When she got to the letters showing Aegis offering bribes to county officials, her jaw actually dropped. This is explosive. Her voice was barely above a whisper. If this gets published, every land deal they have done in the past 20 years will be subject to review. That is the idea. You understand what you are starting here. They will come after you with everything they have. Legal teams, private investigators, smear campaigns. They will dig into every aspect of your life looking for ammunition. Let them dig. I have nothing to hide. Catherine looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we run the story this weekend. Front page. But you need to go on record. Full interview. Are you willing to do that? Yes. The interview took 2 hours. Catherine asked questions that cut to the bone, forcing me to articulate things I had been feeling but had not put into words. Why I refused to sell, what I hoped to accomplish, whether I understood the risks I was taking. When she asked about Silas, my voice nearly broke. He gave up everything so I would have a chance. The least I can do is honor that by refusing to let them erase what he built. The photographer captured that moment, the way my face looked in the harsh winter light, with the mountain looming behind me. That photograph would end up on the front page and later on the cover of a national magazine. But in the moment, I just felt exposed, raw, like I had opened a vein and let the world see what was inside. Rebecca Strand arrived the next day with 2 associates and a determination that reminded me of Silas. She set up a portable office in the cellar, reviewing documents by the light of the sapphire flame, while Jasper watched with a mixture of amusement and awe. This is a litigator's dream. Rebecca spread the geological surveys across the floor, comparing them to Aegis's official filings. They claimed this area was geologically unstable, unsuitable for habitation. But your grandfather's surveys proved the opposite. They lied to the county to justify condemning the property. Can you prove it? The documents prove themselves. What I need from you is to stay alive long enough for this to go to trial. How long will that take? Months. Maybe a year. They will throw every procedural delay at us, every motion to dismiss every legal technicality they can think of. This is going to be a marathon. I can outlast them. Rebecca looked at me with something like respect. I believe you can. The newspaper article hit 3 days after the interview. Catherine had titled it, "David and Goliath on Widow's Peak 16-year-old Orphan Stands Up to Corporate Giant." By that afternoon, I had reporters calling the satellite phone from 3 different states. By the next morning, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press and was running in papers across the country. Aegis responded with a press release calling me a troubled youth with a history of behavioral problems, implying I was dangerous and unstable. They trotted out county officials who swore under oath that the condemnation was entirely legitimate, that they were acting in the public interest. But Rebecca had prepared me for this. We issued our own statement, calm and factual, pointing to the documentation and inviting independent verification. We released photographs of the evidence. We challenged Aegis to explain the discrepancies between their public filings and the geological reality. The court of public opinion began to shift. Letters started arriving at the Cellar, delivered by sympathetic locals who hiked up the trail under cover of darkness. People I had never met sent money, supplies, words of encouragement. A veterans group offered to provide security. A network of environmental activists set up a legal defense fund. The isolation that Aegis had counted on was evaporating. Thorne tried one more personal appeal. He showed up on a clear morning in late February, alone this time, without the machinery or the megaphone. He climbed the trail on foot and stood outside the cellar, calling my name until I emerged. "We need to talk." His voice lacked the corporate smoothness, replaced by something that sounded almost human. "Off the record. Just you and me." I kept the rifle slung but visible. "Talk. This has gotten out of control. Neither of us wanted this circus. The publicity, the lawsuits, the federal investigators sniffing around our permits, it is costing both of us more than this property is worth. Then walk away." Thorne actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You know I cannot do that. I have shareholders, board members, quarterly projections, billions of dollars invested in infrastructure that cannot be built without access to this ridge. Sounds like a problem you should have solved before you started construction. We did solve it, or we thought we did. Your grandfather was supposed to be handled years ago. He was supposed to sell or die or just fade away like everyone else who stood in our way. But he held on. And then he passed this mess to you, and now here we are. Here we are." Thorne met my eyes. "What do you actually want, Kalen? Money I can get you more than you will see in 10 lifetimes. Education. We will put you through any school in the country. A future I can guarantee you, opportunities that kids from your background never even dream about. What I want is for you to leave. That is not going to happen." Thorne's voice hardened. "So what is the end game here? You win in court. You get to keep your pile of rocks, and then what? You are still 16 years old with no family and no prospects. You are still alone on a mountain with winter coming again next year and the year after that. I have Silas's legacy. I have this land. I have the truth. That is more than most people get. The truth does not keep you warm at night. The sapphire flame does. Thorne stared at me, and I saw the moment he realized I was serious. That this was not a negotiation or a phase or teenage rebellion. That I genuinely believed I could hold out against everything he represented. You are going to lose eventually. His voice was quiet now, almost sad. Maybe not today or tomorrow. But corporations do not die. We just keep coming back, different names and different faces, until we get what we need. You are mortal. We are not. Then I guess we will find out which lasts longer, mortality or greed. He turned and walked back down the mountain without another word. I watched him disappear into the trees and felt something shift in my chest. He had been trying to break me with logic, with the weight of inevitability. But he had accidentally given me the one thing I needed most, the certainty that I was doing the right thing. The legal battle consumed the next 8 months. Rebecca and her team filed injunctions, restraining orders, civil suits that challenged every aspect of Aegis's operations in the county. Aegis responded with their own barrage of legal motions, trying to have the case dismissed, trying to disqualify Rebecca, trying to seal the evidence from public view. The judge, a federal appointee named Harrison Cole, refused to be intimidated. He scheduled hearings, demanded documentation, and made it clear that he was going to follow the law regardless of who it hurt. When Aegis tried to claim executive privilege on certain documents, Judge Cole threatened them with contempt. The trial itself was anticlimactic in some ways. Most of the work had been done in the preliminary hearings, where Rebecca systematically dismantled Aegis's justifications for the condemnation. By the time we got to oral arguments, the outcome felt inevitable. But Aegis had one final card to play. They brought in their own 16-year-old, a kid from a group home, who testified that I had threatened him, that I was violent and unstable. It was an obvious plan, and Rebecca tore him apart on cross-examination, but the damage was done. The jury saw 2 kids from the system, and they had to decide which one was telling the truth. Rebecca put me on the stand last. She asked me about Silas, about the 12 years I spent thinking I had been abandoned, about what it felt like to discover that I had been protected in the cruelest possible way. My voice shook when I answered. Love is not always gentle. Sometimes it is a man giving up his rights to his grandson so that corporate lawyers cannot use that relationship against him. Sometimes it is 12 years of silence and sacrifice so that when the moment comes, the person you love has the tools to fight back. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the forewoman looked directly at me and said the word that changed everything. Liable. Aegis Power was found liable for fraudulent land acquisition, bribery of public officials, environmental violations, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages were set at $40 million, though Rebecca warned me that collecting would be its own battle. But the money was not the point. The point was the precedent. The point was proving that a kid with nothing but the truth could stand up to a corporation and win. The settlement negotiations took another 3 months. Aegis wanted to appeal, but their insurance carriers were threatening to drop them, and their stock price had already taken a beating from the publicity. In the end, they agreed to pay $15 million in cash surrender, all claims to the property in perpetuity, and fund an independent environmental review of all their projects in the region. Rebecca took her fee and donated half of it to legal aid organizations. I took the rest and did what Silas would have wanted. The Arthur Vance Legacy Fund launched on a cold morning in November, exactly 1 year after I had first arrived at the Cellar. The mission was simple: provide support to kids aging out of foster care, housing assistance, educational grants, legal representation, mental health services. Everything I had needed and had not had. But I did not stop there. I negotiated a contract with the county to provide free heating to every low-income household and group home within 50 miles. The gas from the mountain would flow, but it would flow to the people who needed it most, not to the corporation that wanted to profit from it. Widow's Peak became something I had never expected, not just a property or a source of income, but a symbol, proof that the system could be beaten if you were willing to hold on long enough. I used part of the settlement to rebuild the cellar into something permanent. Not a mansion, just a solid structure of stone and timber that honored what Silas had built while making it livable year-round. The sapphire flame still burned in the original fireplace, but now it fed a modern heating system that kept the whole building warm. Jasper moved into the guest room once his leg had fully healed. He had nowhere else to go, and I was tired of being alone. He taught me to hunt, to read the mountain, to understand the rhythms of weather and wildlife. He filled in more stories about Silas, giving me a picture of my grandfather that was more complete than any memory could be. On the anniversary of Silas's death, I hiked to the highest point on the ridge and scattered ashes that Jasper had been keeping for 3 years. Silas had wanted to be part of the mountain he had protected, and now he was. I stood there in the wind, watching the ash spiral away into the gray sky, and finally let myself say the things I had been holding back. You did not abandon me. You fought for me in the only way that would work. You gave me everything you had, even when it meant I would hate you for it. I understand now. I understand why you had to be cruel to be kind, why you had to let me think the worst so that I would be ready for this. I am sorry I doubted you. I am sorry I spent so long thinking I was unwanted, and I promise I will make this place mean something. I promise your sacrifice will not be wasted. The wind carried my words away, and I imagined Silas hearing them somewhere in the granite and the sky. Winter came again, but this time I was ready. The Legacy Fund supported its first group of kids, 17 in total, ranging from 16 to 19. We helped them find housing, connected them with jobs, made sure they had someone to call when things got hard. One girl, Emma, showed up on my doorstep in December with everything she owned in a backpack, just like I had arrived a year before. She was 17, aging out of care with nowhere to go and no one to help her. I gave her a room in the transitional housing we had set up, gave her time to breathe, to figure out what came next. She was quiet at first, wary of charity that might come with strings attached, but slowly she started to trust that this was real, that someone actually cared whether she made it or not. On my 18th birthday, I sat on the porch of the rebuilt cellar and watched the sun set over the valley. The mountains were painted in shades of purple and gold, and the air smelled like pine and snow. Jasper was inside making dinner, the sound of him moving around the kitchen a comforting background hum. Emma was in the main house reading by the fire. 2 years. I had been fighting for 2 years, first to survive and then to win, and now to build something that would last. I was legally an adult now, no longer a ward of the state or a minor who could be dismissed. The property was mine without qualification. The future was mine to shape. I thought about all the kids who were sitting in group homes right now, staring at walls and wondering if anyone gave a damn whether they lived or died. Kids who had been told they were problems-burdened statistics. I thought about how Silas had given everything to make sure I did not disappear into that machinery. The sapphire flame burned behind me, steady and eternal. The mountain breathed beneath my feet. And for the first time since I could remember, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do with my life. No one in this valley would face the cold alone, not while I was still breathing.